Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Roll Wise podcast, your show where we talk about things related to tabletop RPGs, games, and stuff. So this week, we decided we would be looking at a specific topic. We were going to drill in a little bit, and we were going to discuss something that I think is important to gaming, but maybe not as often talked about when running games, or with, or maybe even as a DM, GM, or whatever the game calls it. What you do when you're trying to end your session with the players. Now, this is something that I find very interesting. Hopefully for you guys, like when you're doing a session, we tend to at our table find that our sessions go about 2 hours a week with our home table and everything like that. And then on our live streams, we do about 2 hours. We've had some longers and stuff like that. So we've very firmly fall into the you know role playing on a work night crowd. Can't stay up too
Right.
late. Got to get my sleep, all that kind of stuff. But people that have longer sessions may approach it a little bit differently. And so I think there are definitely strategies and ways that you want to end your session. So I think I'll just kind of open up with a basic question. Do you guys have a game that you've either run or played in where you got to like an end of a session that you remember to this day, where you were like, oh man, I couldn't wait to just get back into it? Does anybody have one of those they want to throw out there for us?
I do have one. It was, and this is the game that I talk about all the time. I know I've talked about you guys with it, and I'm pretty sure I've mentioned on the show before. But the Earthfon game that really spawned my love for the game, where our group of adventurers were stuck in a tunnel, like hacking down hundreds of undead that were coming in the tunnel. And we had like bottleneck them, and we were trying to fight our way out, or figure out, or kill them all so we could get out. It was fairly hopeless and a bleak cliffhanger, but we had to stop there, and it wasn't a planned cliffhanger. It was just sort of what happened. And so the cliffhanger from that week, where it was like, oh, you guys are stuck in this tunnel, basically doing shifts, hacking down undead. What's going to happen next week? Spoiler: we all died. But the
But at
cliffhanger
least we were interested to
but the
know what was going to
cliffhanger
happen.
was a strong one. We really wanted to know what was going to happen. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's the best one, and that one wasn't intentional. It was just how the game went.
Well, timing is rough. I think the sessions, I don't have a specific example, I guess is what I'm saying. But the sessions, the games that I've played in the campaigns that I've looked forward to like all of the next week were the ones where like there were some stakes, there were some things on the line, or we were close to solving something or close to accomplishing a goal. Like whether they were intentional cliffhangers, we at least stopped somewhere where it felt like, I would have been like, hey, do you guys want to play tomorrow instead of wait until next Thursday?
Sure. Yeah, and we can talk about the importance of the importance of stopping and all that stuff in just a moment. But
yeah,
anecdotally, the story is
Your-
really the interesting part.
Your Pathfinder game had some good cliffhangers too, where we weren't sure like what was going to happen with. Did we stop when the artificer in our group pointed the gun at the girl? Was that a cliffhanger? I think it was.
No, I thought we finished that one.
That was a separate session.
Was
basically,
okay.
Yeah, because it was one of those things where you guys were at the end of it, and we were like, so we were running so just a little bit of context. We were running this game. It was in Pathfinder Second Edition, and we had our home table and everything like that. There was this tinkerer that had kind of gotten a little bit mad in the city of Alkenstar, and he was basically trying to gather all these like experimental pieces and parts and everything like that to create a clockwork body for his daughter that was suspended in some sort of mysterious goo, let's call it. So the party, trying to solve this through nonviolent means, eventually tracks down the main menace who's been doing basically a terrorist in the city, as he's trying to acquire the things for his machinations. And literally, like, so out of nowhere, they see this giant glass capsule. They see the professor who's used clockworks to make his body different, monstrous, and everything like that in the pursuit of science. And one of the players goes, "I think something's really important in this, and I happen to have a firearm." I
Well,
was like,
we were fighting him, and we were concerned we were losing, and that was
mhm.
when it was like, okay, well, I'm doing this, and we were all like,
Yeah. So I really hadn't like thought that they would take this approach because
okay,
being that they're
first off,
good guys.
we did not take this. We didn't
Royal we.
discuss this. We did not discuss this. The other person took it upon themselves.
Mm. So I actually did end the session a little bit early there because
Yeah.
we had thought about like because I was just like, well, what should we do? And that was like an accidental cliffhanger, honestly. Like I didn't realize that was going to be happening. And piece of advice: if you run into something that totally throws you off your game and you've already played for a little bit, it doesn't hurt to end it early.
No.
Just be like, okay, guys, you've got some really good progress. You've done some really interesting things. I need a moment to get it all together. And I mean, you could do that there while they kind of can reconnect themselves and just chat for a moment if you feel like you have the ability to do it. But I feel like the rhythm gets a little bit disrupted if you take 15 minutes to like figure out what comes next a little bit.
And never be sorry to say, never be sad, never be hesitant to say, you've discovered a cliffhanger. We're done for
Yeah.
this evening.
Roll. Oh, yep. You discovered a cliffhanger.
Yeah,
So,
roll your roll your search. You discovered a cliffhanger.
I'm generally in favor of cliffhangers. I don't think that mid combat is always the best place to do it. I know that situation was unique,
mhm.
as somebody took a left turn at Albuquerque and
Yeah,
ended up
we
blowing up
weren't.
in a
Yeah, we weren't really in mid combat at that point. We were.
You guys
We
stop
were
combat
we
and
were at a precipice is what we were. We were
right,
standing, we were literally standing on the edge of a cliff. And that's kind of what happened in the zombie game too, where we were getting attacked by the zombies, is it was a combat that was no longer a combat. Like because we weren't
right. It had
fighting,
changed,
we
right,
weren't fighting the zombies. We were literally like, clubbing them as they came through a door one at a time. We didn't really need to roll any dice or anything. We were just like, how are we gonna get out of here?
yeah.
Um so and I think that both of those are cliffhangers because they're on the edge of combat, but not necessarily
right.
combat.
Yeah.
Because everything did definitely stall the moment he pointed the gun at the glass, the glass capsule. We
Mhm.
were all like,
Yeah. And
"Whoa!"
I don't know why I would have I'm honestly not sure why I didn't have that thought processed in my mind, but at the same time I was just like, I don't think I have the brain power right now to handle this decision at this moment, but you know what? We came back the next week and it actually turned out for the best. So, I think
No,
we
yeah,
had a
we actually got to a
satisfactory
point
conclusion to that.
where we could have some sort of a negotiation instead of a
Mhm.
combat.
Correct.
Yeah. And it created an interesting conclusion to something. And I hadn't anticipated it, which, I don't try to foresee everything the players will do, but obviously that
For the
was
record, for everyone who's listened to this before, he is the same character that tried to have the honor duel with the Odiug and then shot him before that actually started.
so that should have been my first clue that there were obviously going to be some maybe some unforeseeable events that happened.
Questionable. There's some questionable moral ground that that the party was
Mhm.
certain members of the party were willing to tread.
Yeah. And I have to say that, it's like when you start thinking about these memorable scenes and stuff like that, like I mean, I feel like there's been a couple sessions that, and what's interesting is I generally don't remember cliffhangers and shows and everything like that. It has to be like really high up there for me not to just package the entire show together and forget exactly which
Mhm.
what thing happened at a certain point. I mean, for me, like I was actually thinking about it. I was like, well, from a session ending perspective, I know I try to keep it interesting and all of those kind of things, but other than like really one time, when I just remember this so much because it was one of those like satisfying moments for me. It was an unsatisfying moment for the player. It was a shock for the rest of the group. Like it was one of those like I don't think I could have planned this any better because like so one of the games I really liked running back in college was a Game of Thrones game, and there was this player that had basically been feeding information to the enemy, not for like one session, or two sessions, three sessions, but for months. And so
and he didn't know it, right? Like
mm-mm,
he thought,
zero clue.
yeah.
And so it actually got to the point where they thought I was like metagaming against them. And I was like, no, I'm not metagaming. I assure you all will become clear shortly. And like eventually they got to this point where the tension had escalated and everything like that. And the big reveal was the guy that literally one of the players had befriended for months was the enemy.
Yeah,
It was
was the
like
bad
enemy
guy.
number one was the one that this character had basically been like use like because obviously he thought it was a two-way street where he was getting information and he was giving it, but in fact he was just giving it to the enemy. He was getting bad intel in return, and like the reveal on that moment and the way that that session ended, I was like, and you see your good friend Florian. He stares there with a satisfying smirk on his face, and you realize this entire time I've only been partially a jerk, only partially.
Well, yeah, and that's a perfect cliffhanger. Like that realization, like, oh,
Mhm.
well, this is bad.
So did the players like in like when you when the session stopped then the next week were the players like talking before the game that they were excited to be back and ready to go and
They, there was a lot of anger, frustration, things like there was a lot directed at this. There was interest, there was intrigue. I mean, it was just like I think in terms of like 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 I don't like to necessarily say that this was like the peak moment of DMing, but it was one of those things that was like a very good moment, goes in the core memory banks in terms of like my DMing and all that. And I think that the players enjoyed it quite a bit as well, even though ultimately they hated it, but they liked hating it if I were to say that
Well,
because they were like,
it's
the,
dramatic. Like that's the
yeah, it
part
was
that's
such a dramatic twist
yeah,
that they were like, oh, oh
yeah.
really? And of course, the main player that had been doing this the entire time, um, he may have been a little bit more. Might have been a little more invested in it than everybody else. So I think that that's because I think that's interesting because I think when we talk about it, like when you see the player's investment, you see all that kind of stuff. I mean, it kind of gets people back to the table. But what do you? I mean, do you think that there's a like if you like it rather than just having a session that goes like, okay, well, you stop at an end, you rest. Like, why do you think it's important to have good endings for your sessions? Like, is there a benefit? Can you just rest in it in each time and carry that excitement, or how does that go for you guys?
I mean I think sometimes you can it depends on the group and how the campaign is going I think if the stakes are too high and you're ending on these really life and death things
Mhm.
like every week, it's hard. It's especially hard in our games where we're only playing for about 2 hours. In my head, a role playing session should be about 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours. And so we're playing half of a session every week. So I don't know that everything that we end with needs to, have a cliffhanger or
Mhm.
that they all need to be as big. Um,
And so
I
I
don't
think we
know.
can talk about the types of ending sessions in
Yeah.
there. But I
Well,
mean,
well, I just have one thing that I want to add to that.
Yeah.
I think really what you need to what a cliffhanger is, it's a literary device. It's like anything. If you do it every
mhm,
week, it's going to be too much. Like the players are
mhm,
going to just get overloaded and they're not going to like they're going to care, but it's not going to have the same impact that you have if you use it, you
mhm,
know, every so often. So I think that's the one thing is I think they're good to continue interest and get it, especially if you can get those really memorable moments where like there's that shock moment where
mhm.
oh god, well we'll continue next week. But like you just don't want to like because you just don't want to overdo the trope
Sure.
like Batman, the old Batman TV show where it's will Batman get out of the acid bath to an end next week,
Right.
type of thing. Like you
Well,
don't want to do it all the time, but I think it is but I think it's one of the things that makes your game engaging because ideally that's what you want, right? You want the
mhm,
game to be engaging and the game to be the thing that makes people go, "Oh yeah, I'm excited to see where the story goes." And a
mhm.
cliffhanger is a tool to do that.
Yeah. And I feel like that's actually probably the most important reason to like not dismiss how sessions end more so than anything, like cuz if you like I mean when and I hate to bring it back to our corporate world and all that stuff, but we talk about when we were talking about it working in call centers, you talk about the beginning of something and the end of something. And so, what did they call that? The primacy and latency effects or something like that. And so, like
Yeah.
the middle could be muddy and a little bit weird and probably go off the rails a bit. But if you have a good ending, people remember that end of that session much more than they're going to remember the meat in
Yes.
the
Mhm.
middle. And so, I mean, sure, you do a lot of substantive things in there, and you can create that high level feeling of accomplishment. But if you end it with just kind of like a, well, we don't know what we're doing next, or we don't really have any leads, or we haven't sparked any interest, you can be like, okay, well, like, so let's say the middle meat was like, okay, well, we're in this dungeon, we fought goblins. Okay, well, this 2-hour combat took up our entire week. And I have to say that we just played a session of Dragon Bane where that kind of happened to be our session where, and I really reflected on that, going, I didn't really think there was much exciting after the goblins, other than knowing that you guys still needed to kind of like continue to investigate the crypt and everything like that. But it wasn't like, I mean, it felt almost worse than the will Batman survive for next week, because you guys were safe, you guys had found it. But well, I guess we did end it with something, right? That was
Yeah,
kind of,
there was a dream sequence that
yeah.
we ended with, but I think those moments where like a stable stopping point is okay once in a while too,
Mhm,
because like
mhm,
it gives you that moment of rest to like consider what happened or
mhm.
what's happened in the gaming sessions before, so you can kind of think about that and kind of like formulate what are we doing next. And I think that's sometimes a good place to end too.
Well, and what I was going to lead to is, it's actually like, instead of a cliffhanger every time, because as Jeff said, 2-hour sessions where we literally have a
Right.
cliffhanger every 2 hours. It's like, what was that movie with Jason Statham? Crank, can't let your heart go below like
Right. Yeah.
100 beats a minute. Like that's a little too intense, I think, for
Well,
everybody.
no, you're
Um,
right. You're right. I do think that there are times that you can have more minor cliffhangers. Like you said, you go back to the inn and rest. Maybe you just accomplish some goal,
mhm.
vanquish some minor foe, and you're like, you need to blow off a little steam, and you start, imbibing in a few adult beverages, right? And
Carousing.
carousing a bit. And
Carousing is what
it
I
kind of
told
ends
them.
that way. And next week we'll find out where you woke up the next morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or I think this is one advantage of Dragonbane is ending every session with your character advancing,
Mhm.
is kind of nice. Like, because that leaves on a like a not high note and a good note,
Yeah.
and oh, I get to see what the skills are going to do next week and stuff like that. Like, I think that's a
Mhm.
I think that's a good note to end on. And you do it even if there's a cliffhanger. So like that's good. But
Yeah.
like, yeah, there are games, and there are games that do stuff like this. Like Delta Green has the home scenarios.
Mhm.
Like you can begin and end with, well, you go home. How do you let's role play your family and how you deal with the newfound horrors that you have in your brain. Or in Conan, they actually have a carousing mechanic for
Mhm.
downtime. Like, I think downtime in role playing games is a little bit different because you like giving your characters that downtime makes the
Mhm.
characters feel like real people. So I
Mhm.
feel like it needs to be like it builds the character more, in my opinion. So I
Mhm.
think that's why it's important to have those non cliffhanger moments where it's like, oh yeah, you go back to the tavern. What do you do
Yeah.
when you're not on an adventure? Like, and I think those moments are cool too.
And I think it's part engagement and part investment based on
Mhm.
that, right? Because I you can have the cliffhanger, and the cliffhanger is always exciting. Like, if you can give somebody a reason to come back, that next week, and they get to do something cool that next week, and you've mentally prepared them for that, and it's cool. That's fun. You submit your gaming table with creating those experiences. But having resolved something too, like, that's really important. Like,
Mhm.
actually, like, finishing a quest or something like that.
Yeah.
You But I think that, in terms of resolution, I'm always kind of a fan, especially if you're doing longer campaign play, is not only having your solution, but having something that kind of teases what could be happening next or something like that, just to kind of give you a window as to possible futures that players could be experiencing. Because, as with Dragonbane, we'll talk about Dragonbane in its own video very shortly. The character development thing is also really nice, because then there's that investment in the characters that you
Mhm.
guys are building up over time, whether that be, something as simple as like, oh, well, I used my sword this time and I rolled a dragon, so now I I'm better at swords because I rolled above the number, and I'm increasing my legend. Now
Yeah.
I'm a better swordsman in the Misty Vale. So I think that those are kind of really interesting and impactful approaches to ending sessions, because I think that when you say, because I don't want people to have the impression that you have to end every session on a cliffhanger. That's not. I don't think that's what we're saying at all, right? That's not what we're saying.
No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't.
but but if you can put a cliffhanger in there that's appropriately placed, and as dramatically makes sense, then that's a perfectly valid way to end your session.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it every time. I think a cliffhanger is like a moment of drama and action. I think
Mhm,
you can do a lead in at the end of a session to give kind of an idea of like, oh, there's more to the story that isn't
mhm,
necessarily the same as a cliffhanger. It's kind of an expansion of like, oh, there's more to the story. And then I think the downtime is okay sometimes too, because like I said, it gives you those moments to kind of like think about your character and how they're going to progress and develop and who they are.
yeah.
um One of, and kind of let everybody know what kind of spawned this conversation is we recently watched a couple different videos where one basically said always live on, like, always end on a cliffhanger, to pull your players back in to every session. Then the other one's like never end on a cliffhanger because they might not come, they deserve a complete story. um and I see both ends to this, but I think if you have a table you're consistently running with friends or whatever,
Mhm,
like, I think mixing the two is the best option
mhm,
because it's just like a story, right? Like,
mhm,
you have to like balance those two, because if it's just thump thump thump, cliffhanger 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 every week, like, the cliffhangers don't matter any more than the downtime does. So you want to vary kind of where you end,
Yeah.
down notes, up notes, stuff like that. So
yep. And build excitement, increase investment, do all those kind
yeah.
of things. So that when if they have to miss a session, they dislike it. And I mean, if you can get people talking about your game in between sessions, because I mean, everyone's got various messenger chat and all that stuff.
Mhm.
If they talk about it in between session, I mean, as a game master, then you kind of won.
Yeah.
Especially when you have a session where you lead off, and then the players, they come with that gleam in their eye to the next session because they obviously planned something that to take
Yeah,
place next, and you're like,
if you can get players to
audibly,
plan or talk about it in between sessions, or really even just think about their character, like, what is
mhm,
my character going to do to
yeah,
complete this goal or
yeah,
whatever. Like, that means that you're telling a good story. So
yeah,
Yeah. You guys hit it on the head. I've heard both of you use the term investment.
mhm,
You
mhm.
know, the players being invested in their characters improves the cohesion at the table, improves their will to show up week after week, improves it, gets them excited. Oh, I want to see what happens next week. And it
mhm,
doesn't have to be a huge life or death, vat of acid, carriage going over a cliff type moment, right?
mhm,
It can be, oh, you were carousing in the bar and saw what you thought was a familiar figure, but when you turned around, it wasn't there.
yeah,
And then you got pulled back into the drinking game or the singing of songs or the rolling of dice or whatever you were, and it was weird little stuff. Like Brent
mhm,
said, like lead-ins, little tiny little plot hooks or breadcrumbs to the next part of the story.
it
Yeah.
yeah. No, I think honestly, I think that's the kind of stuff that really helps. And I think the one thing that's kind of, I think that probably the next thing that I was going to ask about you guys about was that, in terms of like all those plot hooks and kind of putting the breadcrumbs in and everything like that, sometimes you find that you can't end the session the way you want it to, right? Like, because the session goes longer than you expect, or maybe events don't go the way you expect, or something like that. Have like what kind of how would you expect someone to kind of tackle the ending of a session if like combat was like had gone over by like 15 minutes from the quote unquote session end, and you guys were a pretty strict group? Like, you guys would
Well,
you
I
guys just kind of go, "Oop, let's
n-
now that combat's done, we're going to dole out rewards next week"? Is that an effective teaser, or where do you guys stand
that
on
would be what I would do, but I would do it right after something significant happened. Um, like, if I thought I was going to go over, like, you can look at it and you can be like, oh, this combat's going to go over.
it?
I
Mhm,
would end it early in that case after something significant happened, like somebody crit failed or somebody crit succeeded. Like,
mhm,
and then I would make a cliffhanger out of it. I would be like, oh, it's a crit. You do max damage, and we'll see what happens to the dragon next week, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Um, so I would probably kind of go a little bit longer to try and wait for one of those moments, or create a moment where somebody
Yeah.
interrupted or something like that, or like an environmental thing happened or something to create kind of a cliffhanger just to give me space.
Mhm.
Um, improvisation's pretty important if you have to stop something
Yeah.
in the middle of something. So,
Yeah,
Mhm.
when you're up against a deadline or a time limit, every group's different, and maybe somebody has a babysitter only until a certain time, or
Mhm.
for whatever reason they have to get home because they have to get up early for work. Like communicating and saying, "Hey, we're getting close to time. There's not a really great stopping point. Do you mind if we finish the combat tonight? If we're going to go 15 or 20 minutes over?" And if people
Mhm.
say no, then you've got to try to insert some sort of an artificial point just to respect
Mhm.
the group and the table. But I like Brent's idea. If something big or significant happens, that kind of does give you a little mini cliffhanger to
mhm.
stop at. I mean, if the group's fine continuing, then you try to continue. But
Yeah.
we've had times where it was like, people were like, yeah, let's go for another half an hour, and then 45 minutes later we're still
Yeah,
doing something, and it's like people are starting to look at their watches and slowly putting stuff into
and
packs.
if they do agree to go a little bit longer, I would look for, even if it's like the next thing that happens, like if you get one of those significant moments, that's where I would end it.
Mhm.
Um, where if it was a significant moment where it was, like I said, a crit fail, whatever, or anything like
Sure.
that, like that's where I'd be like, okay, well, that's where we're gonna end it for tonight because it's a good place, that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
no, that's a
Yeah.
great idea. I like that.
So I think it, you guys are probably the advice is probably pretty practical in terms of like just mapping it out. Now I think if you're new to a system or something like that, you're probably going to have your most challenges finding that balance because a combat could go long, could go short. You're just not used to the timing and all that stuff. But once you get your pacing down and everything along those lines, I mean, especially as the DM, you have the ability to kind of say, okay, well, I know a typical D&D combat of this type is 35, 40 minutes, and we have 20 minutes left. So, you could choose as they're getting to that point to choose a different option, do the character development, do that, downtime reflective teaser thing, as opposed to just getting into the combat, especially when you
Mhm.
know it's going to go over and not everyone wants to do that. But you have control, so you can kind of plan it out, and it doesn't hurt, especially if you're running a longer session, to kind of like take a break mid session, because nobody really games very strongly for 4 hours straight without any breaks. But if you guys have a 4 hour session or you guys are playing 4 to 6 hours, because some people actually get those really long sessions going, take a bit break, take two breaks, and at each of those breaks, as the GM, take maybe just even a couple minutes. It doesn't even take that long to go, okay, well, these are the kind of story beats that I anticipate. You know, this is, I feel like I can wrap it up, or these would be some good points to stop and all that kind of stuff. You can't 100% predict it because your players are always unpredictable, but you can at least take inventory of what you expect to happen and how well you can accommodate that stopping point.
Yeah, that's one of those situations where improvisation really helps a lot, where you can
Mhm.
think of something to be like an interruption, or like the roof falls in on the tavern or something.
Bees. There's always bees.
Bees,
A swarm of bees.
a swarm of bees comes and takes everybody. There's a sea monster.
Sea monster. But it's a lake. Whole Nessie.
It's a lake monster then, guys,
Lake
whatever,
monster.
water monster, whatever. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so I think in terms of like session endings and stuff like that, in summary, really it sounds like cliffhangers are good, but use them judiciously.
Yeah,
Don't use it every time.
and I don't think cliffhangers are the only thing that's going to get, like, I don't think ending on a cliffhanger is really going to get your players to come back every time.
Mhm.
It helps and it'll make the game engaging, um, but I don't think it's going to do it every time. And I don't think ending every session with a complete story is going to get people to come back either time every time either.
Mhm.
I think either way it's going to get stale. So you should mix both up.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, but I think to be more specific though, I mean, as you guys had mentioned, you guys can talk about. I mean, you can have that downtime where you give the players a chance to really discuss like what's
right.
happened and what's next. Give them a chance to develop their characters, whether that be through leveling up or through skill improvements or something like that,
Right.
or sharing certain teasers or like previews of what happens next. I think that's really four good ways to say, hey, this is. I think if you varied those enough, you give yourself enough techniques to say, okay, well, I don't have to end everything on a
Oh, for
Right.
sure.
fight.
Yeah.
So that next, so basically, and it can give you a way to, give yourself. One of the things I really like about game prep is that, I think if anybody watches like the Lazy Dungeon Master, Mike Shea, um, he's got a really good book. If you guys are interested in like game prep and stuff like that guys, top notch. But one of the things I really took away from it is that like have a strong start. It doesn't mean you have to like start every session with combat, because that also is weird, but have a way that you get people propelled into the action. And I think you can easily lead that session end to your session beginning if you do it well.
You should start
Yeah.
every session with getting your players ambushed, though. I'm just going to say that. Your Delta Green game, just ambush.
There's a lot of
Cyberpunk game,
obtuse angles
ambush.
here. What are those angled dongs or whatever it is?
Oh, I can't remember what. Yeah, I can't remember what they're called.
You know what
yeah.
I'm talking about, like in strange angles.
I was trying to think, well, how could I ambush my characters in a Delta Green game? And I was like, I guess a burglary is kind of an ambush. modern day ambush.
You get mugged. Even in Delta Green, I get mugged. Ugh, city falling apart.
Modern day.
So I think that's pretty much. I think that can conclude our thoughts on kind of how to end sessions and all that stuff.
Yeah, I
What
think they were good.
what I would do is I would give it to people that are listening to say, hey, you know what? Obviously, if you have your own methodologies, or if you have like good experiences that you'd love to share, send it in the comments. We love reading these kind of stories. We love kind of hearing what kind of techniques that you are, because obviously we're learning ourselves. We like to run games, and so I profess that I am not the perfect game master by any means. That's okay. I'm still learning. It's a lifelong hobby. Same thing with everybody else here. We're always learning more about the skill. So leave comments, do all that kind of stuff. And if you like the content, let us know with a like. I think that sounds weird now that I said it out loud. But
Subscribe.
like that
If you're
button,
there leaving a comment, yeah,
Like,
if
comment,
you can,
subscribe.
give us a like, subscribe.
smash a button, subscribe, hit an
Bell,
alert bell.
bell
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah,
Touch
do
Do all
bell.
those YouTube things.
Touch the bell. Do YouTube stuff.
Yeah, because we would like to hear the conversation with
One thing I will say about comments is, if you do have any good stories about cliffhangers on games that you've had, please include those. We love to read those too. Just to kind of like your favorite moments that were cliffhangers or whatever. So yeah.
like where did you guys stop your session and all that stuff. So if they don't have a chance to comment down in the YouTube stuff and they want to reach out to us normally, what do they do, Jeff?
They look for @RollWise on Facebook threads or Twitter, or they email us rollwiseguys@gmail.com.
And as always, thank you for joining us. Do all the YouTube stuff. We appreciate it. Share your stories, share your conversations. We enjoy your company. And as always, roll well, roll wise, and be safe out there. Thank you,
Thanks.
everybody.